Whenever you're ready.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the 415ers podcast. As always, Evan Giddings, Marc Rendy with you 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, 95.7 The Game. Download, rate, subscribe, 5 stars, or Marc's going to come find you. This is the way that we're doing it.
I might send you a strongly worded email, but I'm not sure I'll go find you in person.
Well, Marc's going to go get a haircut in a little bit, so the guy's going to be Dapper Dan looking like John Wick. So don't make him act like it if you don't give us 5 stars.
And you have to check us out on YouTube on Friday to see how my haircut looks. So
absolutely. YouTube. We're posting a couple of clips, kind of chopping things up as we give it to you on the Odyssey Podcast Network as well. Go make sure to check out those clips, rate, subscribe, download, send all your friends. Marc, I want to start today with kind of a new expectation for this team in the San Francisco 49ers, because right now, entering week 4, they do have a little bit of a longer week coming up. Monday Night Football, another primetime slot. It will be against the Los Angeles Rams, a team they're very familiar with, but everyone's kind of still stuck on, I think, the tough loss that they sustained against Denver in week 3. 11-10. We went through it in our reaction episode. You can go check that out. 9 points that the defense gave up, a running game that, and really an offense that looked kind of stagnant with Jimmy Garoppolo in his first game this year as the starter. And so I want to start with what the new expectation for this team is, because a lot of people, at least when Trey Lance was QB1, sort of had this wavering level of expectation. Like, it could be Super Bowl, it could be 6 wins. We don't really know. But Jimmy Garoppolo seemed to sort of soften those expectations as soon as he was forced into action. And so I want to start there. Like, have your expectations of this team changed now that a guy who you've admitted, you're not the hugest fan of in Garoppolo is now forced to again be the driver of this team?
Well, it's been an interesting conversation because, when Trey Lance first went down, Trey Lance came in, or Jimmy Garoppolo came in to replace Trey Lance, and he played well in that Seahawks game, got the win. The team dominated by 20 points. The overarching conversation at that point was, oh my God, like, Jimmy Garoppolo makes this team better, and there's a better chance that they're going to make the playoffs. There's, at least Vegas thought that the general public would think that now the Niners have a better chance to win the Super Bowl. I know you and I talked about that last week, and we kind of probably disagreed with Vegas there a little bit. But now, after his first start, Jimmy Garoppolo's first start of this season, where he only scores 9 points offensively, oh, I guess 10 points offensively, the field goal, and the defense gave up 9 points, but then Garoppolo gave Denver 2 more points. Things have kind of changed. I mean, you look at over-under win totals now, it's still set at 9.5. The under is a slight favorite there. It's got the minus odds, meaning that Vegas thinks that's a little more likely to happen. And I think I'm thinking of this less so from a win total perspective, Evan. I think what I care more about, I mean, obviously you want your team to win and you want them to go to the postseason and you want them to play well. But just from a watchability standpoint, I think this team has taken a gigantic dive from the Trey Lance injury. Just from what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo, I think the whole offseason and the way everything happened, it was a really strange situation between Lance and Garoppolo and Shanahan. The way everything happened, the way Jimmy Garoppolo eventually came back, I think it kind of masked and made people almost forget Jimmy Garoppolo's issues and the issues that this team has while he's at quarterback. They saw Trey Lance struggle for a start and a quarter. And then he got hurt. Jimmy Garoppolo comes in and, throws a touchdown pass to Ross Dwelly, looks good, plays efficient, and suddenly they're thinking, oh my God, why did we get rid of this guy? He's playing really good football. And then one start later, he plays one of the worst games of his career, and it's his first start. He wasn't expected to be the starter. His arm is a little sore because he hasn't thrown a lot, didn't have a real training camp. I think that's all fair. I'm not sure Jimmy Garoppolo should be talking about that in the post-game press conference, but it's probably all fair. And suddenly, this entire fan base now realizes, oh my God, this team is just kind of boring when Jimmy Garoppolo's the quarterback. The play calling wasn't great, but I think it's also just because of the limitations of your quarterback. And you realize now that even if the San Francisco 49ers have a successful season, if they hit that Vegas over of 9.5, they get double digit wins. They're 10-7, 11-6, whatever the number is. It just doesn't seem to me like it's going to be a very exciting season, and it doesn't encourage me to want to tune in every single week. Of course, I'm going to. This is my local team, and of course, we host this podcast about the 49ers. We got to be watching the games, but one game, I think it kind of refreshes your memory, and I think this is the case for a lot of 49ers fans. And it makes you realize, even if this team is going to win 10 games, I'm not sure how much fun I'm going to have watching it.
See, I would push back on that a little bit, and not because, I mean, sure, aesthetically, you'd love to see your team light up the scoreboard, and in an age of passing dominance, 45 points, you're watching the Bills, you're watching the Chiefs, you're watching, the Packers, the Bucks, although maybe not last weekend. There are teams that put up prolific numbers through the air, and that's all a lot of fun. But I mean, I do think the 49ers, I think the question mark of which Garoppolo is going to show up. Now, it may not be as big of an arm as even Trey Lance, but kind of the question mark of which Jimmy is going to be there on Sunday, to me, is worth tuning in for. And not just because, we're fans of the team, we want to see them succeed, we cover them, and we wish them success. Like, I do think aesthetically there is something to, okay, Jimmy could be the Denver Jimmy. He also could be the Jimmy against the Saints in 2019. Like, you don't know which guy is going to be there. And I know you're shaking your head right now, and you don't expect that to happen on a day in and day out basis. But that's why I'm tuning in on Sunday, because this team is one with the ceiling that people were saying before the season could be Super Bowl ish. But where I'm at with this group right now, I'm also not looking at it as necessarily a win total. But if this is a year essentially where you're running it back, now you're forced into that scenario by having guys that are back from last year, large in part the same core pieces from last season, including now the quarterback. I'm looking at, okay, well then it's got to be similar to last year, and not even aesthetically, but if you're a team that barely got into the playoffs last season, I know they went to the conference championship, but they barely skated in. I mean, you could make an argument that they barely won the 2 games that they won in the playoffs.
They did.
So right now, the expectation for this team to me is about 9 or 10 wins. And that's not going to look pretty every single week, but it's going to be tuning in for, because there is the air of uncertainty. And that's not comfortable for fans to hear. But isn't that why you watch the games? Like, because you don't know what's going to happen?
Of course, and I want to be clear. Like I'm obviously going to be tuning in. I'm not saying I won't.
I
It's
would
just
certainly
the
hope so.
way the way that this offseason and preseason and training camp went. It was okay. We're finally going to get a chance to see who Trey Lance is. Um, you know, Jimmy Garoppolo is back. It's great. He's going to be a fantastic backup quarterback, but fingers crossed that he never has to play, because we want a full season of healthy Trey Lance. And then the injury happens to Trey Lance after they lose in week 1, and just kind of all the air gets taken out of your sails. It's like a gut punch, and the team could still be successful, and perhaps they win a playoff game. You never know. The further they go in the postseason, if they make it that far, fantastic. But it's just not the season, regardless of how many games Jimmy Garoppolo leads this team to win. It's just not the season that I was expecting, and that I think most people were expecting. And after drafting Trey Lance 18 months ago, I've just been waiting patiently to see what he's going to be. And now that we have to wait a whole nother year, it's just difficult for me to wrap my head around the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is once again the quarterback of this team. And, Sunday Night Football in Denver didn't inspire confidence in his ability to pick up the slack and lead this team to wins. Now, I will say, certainly, he will be better than he was on Sunday night, in Denver. He's not going to be as bad as that all season long, certainly. And, Kyle Shanahan, I'm sure, will be better as well. I mean, he took a lot of responsibility post game. They just got George
Did
Kittle
he?
back. He took maybe for what he normally
For
does. He
one
took
play.
responsibility for one play. True. Although, I mean,
Although, to be
I think
fair, that's more than Shanahan usually takes credit for. So I guess that's improvement.
exactly. He took credit for, or he took blame for the safety, saying he put Jimmy Garoppolo in a bad spot, shouldn't have called a long developing play. Um, I know we'll touch on this later, but I am ready to defend Kyle Shanahan in terms of play calling a bit, although I can't defend that the play call that led to that safety. Um, but still, it's important to note. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo, you would hope it seems pretty impossible that he will play to that level in Denver the rest of the season. He will likely be much improved. It's also important to note kind of the injuries that they've been dealing with. I mean, you don't have your top two running backs. George Kittle missed the first 2 weeks. And, Kyle Shanahan said on Monday on his conference call with the media that much like Jimmy Garoppolo has to get back into, game shape, same for George Kittle. So I think there's a lot of blame that Jimmy Garoppolo deserves. Um, the Niners would probably be better off if Trey Lance was still healthy and was their quarterback. But you do also have to note that there are, some extenuating circumstances around him that aren't making this the easiest thing for him right now. And he said, post game, it was my first week back with the guys, and I know a lot of people poked fun at him, like, dude, you've been the starting quarterback for 5 or 6 years now. Like, these guys, these players. But I mean, he had a whole off season where he underwent shoulder surgery. It was never a thought until a few weeks before the regular season that he could return to San Francisco. He was throwing off to the side, didn't throw, didn't practice, didn't get any number one reps until Trey Lance went down. Um, there's certainly something to the fact that he was kind of thrown into this quickly, and as time progresses, I'm sure he will get better. But there's also no excusing just how poor his performance was on Sunday, because you have most quarterbacks in the league with that defensive performance the Niners put on, and you'll win that game by at least 2 scores.
Oh, no, I'd agree. Anytime you force 9 3-and-outs, like, I don't care how many points you give up, you probably should win the football game. It took one quality drive from their opponent to essentially beat them. I mean, and that
Yeah.
cannot happen. Right
And
now,
it took essentially 3 turnovers. It took the fumbled snap, which is probably more on Brendel, the center, than Garoppolo, the interception, and then the safety. The safety doesn't actually count as a turnover, but still, it's essentially a turnover that also gives your opponent 2 points. They could have
well,
survived
you
2
also had
turnovers,
the
but not
ball with
3.
1:20 left, and you still technically had a chance to go down and win the game if Jeff Wilson Jr. doesn't fumble. So after
Yep.
all, I mean, basically 4 turnovers.
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking 3 related specifically to Jimmy Garoppolo, but you're right, 4 as a team. Yeah.
Yeah, and Kyle Shanahan also didn't necessarily take ownership for a whole lot, but he did take some of the ire off of Jimmy Garoppolo by mentioning on that fumbled snap that Jake Brendel went on the count of 2 as opposed to the rest of the offense that went on 1. So we can kind of do away with that. I don't necessarily want to defend Jimmy Garoppolo, but I do think that's where it sounds like a lot of people are going to be headed uh, if he does bounce back.